not last. Though Manson would later describe this period of his life the happiest he had ever been. But soon, his mother would be back to her old ways of neglect and petty crime. And Charles would unfortunately be left feeling abandoned yet again. So by 9 years old, Manson began exhibiting some disturbing behavior. And by disturbing, I mean batshit crazy. Because at 9 years old, he would set his school on fire, just foreshadowing a pattern of crime yet to come. And with a childhood just tainted by neglect, transience, and abuse, he became a part of the juvenile justice system pretty early on. So at 13 years old, Manson would be sent to Gibalt School for Boys, a strict reform school where beatings and harsh punishments were routine. And as you can imagine, this didn't do much for rehabilitating him. If anything, it just hardened him even more. Different times. And a psychologist who actually evaluated a teenage Manson noted his quote-unquote, he was aggressively antisocial and he had a persecution complex, attributing these traits to an unfavorable family life, if it can be called family at all. In other words, Charles Manson basically just grew up feeling unwanted and unloved, and learning early on that violence and deceit could serve as survival tools in a very hostile world. So Manson's childhood and early adult years were a revolving door of correctional institutions. Because if he wasn't running away from a reform school, he was committing new offenses that landed him in juvenile halls and eventually federal prison. And at the age of 17, after escaping a minimum security facility, Manson would be caught driving a stolen car across state lines. I don't know much about law, but I think that's illegal. And it was. It was a federal crime, in fact. And this is when he would start his first prison stint. And over the next 15 years, he would be incarcerated for a number of offenses, including, but not limited to, car theft, armed robbery, pimping, check fraud, and others. So by the time he reached his early 30s, Manson had spent over half of his life behind bars. And for someone who was unwanted and unloved and really didn't have a place in the world, prison kind of became his home. In fact, when he was due to be released from Terminal Island Prison in March of 1967, Manson begged not to be let out. And we actually know that this is a thing that happens to prisoners. They spend so much of their time in jail. That's the only place they know, so it's the only place they're comfortable. And if they get out, they actually really struggle with real life. And sometimes they even take their life, but oftentimes they fall back into crime just to end up in the same place that they already were. But there are some that are rehabilitated and can enter society, but it is not as common as you'd like to think, after requesting permission to stay incarcerated. But of course, that request was denied, and at 32 years old, Manson was thrust back into society during the Summer of Love. And this was a period during the late 1960s, and it was a time of radical culture upheaval, especially in California. Yet for Manson, the world outside of prison was just overwhelming and confusing. So Manson would get out of prison and he would slowly drift over to San Francisco's hippie neighborhood of Hyatt-Ashbury. And upon release, Manson initially actually reported to a transitional clinic in the Hyatt, run by researchers studying the effects of LSD on youth culture. Sign me up. Just kidding. I'm kidding. And I'm definitely kidding because it was covertly funded by agencies like the CIA. Let me know if you want me to deep dive into the CIA and MK Ultra and all that fun stuff, because it's fucked up. And I would love to cover it. So let me know down below if you want me to do that. If you want me to cover that, put the alien emoji down in the comments. But anyway, in Hyatt, Manson found himself in the epicenter of free love, psychedelic drugs, and anti-establishment politics, along with spiritual experimentation. So it was just a perfect breeding ground for someone with his particular skill set. And that skill set was manipulation. So Manson quickly learned how to take advantage of this hippie subculture by adopting its look and its lingo. With his long hair, scraggly beard, and intense eyes, it's insanely intense eyes. He's like, it's terrifying. He's like little freaky freak. And some said he even resembled Jesus Christ, which that's a bit blasphemous, but all right. And as Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor who put Manson on trial, observed, plenty of con men and criminals had committed worse crimes. Quote unquote, so why are we still talking about Charles Manson? But Pelosi would say that Manson, quote unquote, had an aura 1,000th of 1% of people have. A near mystical charisma that drew people in. And I don't know exactly what people are talking about, because you hear him talk like in interviews and everything, and it's just whack nonsense, you know? But I guess most people were on drugs and stuff, so it might make sense, I guess. But anyway, behind bars, Manson had been a student of human behavior and extreme ideas. And he would actually study Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, learning tactics to charm and manipulate others. And prison records show that he actually explored Scientology. And he would absorb concepts from occultish groups like Process Church of Final Judgment, whose prophecy of reconciliation between Satan and Jesus Christ at the end of the world intrigued him a lot. And Manson was also deeply impressed by literature, notably Robert A. Heinlein, and specifically a science fiction novel that was named Stranger in Strange Land, which features a charismatic figure who found a spiritual movement of shared women and communal living. So this combination of self-help, Scientology, science fiction, and apocalyptic religion blended Manson's mind. And so he began crafting his own personal philosophies. And perhaps the most significant influence on Manson was music. And he actually fancied himself an aspiring singer-songwriter. And music became both his passion and tool for evangelism. Because in prison, he actually learned guitar from a seasoned bank robber. And he would just cultivate his dreams of pop stardom. And after release, he would constantly talk about the Beatles, whose 1968 White Album he believed contained hidden messages that were meant just for him. This is where the crazy's starting to brew. And the song Helter Skelter in particular took on a prophetic meaning in Manson's mind. And Manson's musical ambitions were not entirely delusional, because through a chance encounter, he befriended Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys in 1968. You know, I'm picking up a good vibration. He's picking up a good vibration. I like the Beach Boys, don't judge me. And Wilson was actually charmed enough by Manson and his entourage of free-loving girls that he let them crash at his mansion for a time. Like, I just want to know exactly what he's saying to these people, because it's crazy. And the Beach Boys even recorded one of Manson's songs and released it. Unfortunately for Manson, it was uncredited, but it was a B-side to a single in 1968. And it was called Cease to Exist, and then retitled to Never Learn Not to Love. So Manson would see this as just the beginning. And through Dennis Wilson, he met a music producer, Terry Melcher. And he would harbor hopes of actually landing a record deal. But when those hopes fizzled, it was a crushing blow to Manson. And rejection by the music industry would soon fester into one of many resentments driving his dark fantasies. Guy holds a grudge. So to understand how Manson could attract followers and convince them of wild ideas, one must understand the climate of the 1960s. The era was ripe with cult formation, as we know if you watch this channel. Because the youth were rebelling against mainstream authority, spurning traditional religion and square society in favor of spiritual exploration, psychedelic drugs, and communal living. Free spirit hippie life, you know? In San Francisco in 1967 to 1968 was the heart of this counterculture. And it was just a place where runaways, dropouts, and seekers converged, all just desiring connection in alternative families. And into the scene stepped Charles Manson, a man with nowhere to go and nothing to lose, armed with a career criminal's cunning and an amateur guru's patter. And he would just package himself as this guru prophet figure, just borrowing liberally from decades' symbols. And as one cultural scholar observed, Manson, quote unquote,
took on all those signs, LSD, music, free love, communal lifestyles, and reframed them as tools for apocalyptic mass murder. Totally bizarre, totally evil, and very, very seductive.
Oh. And ironically, while Manson did appropriate the hippie image, he was never a true believer in peace and love. And he would just present himself as this kind of messiah. A messiah of love, but beneath that facade, he nursed hatred towards society and towards racial minorities and towards the establishment. Like that one uncle at Thanksgiving that nobody likes. Still, at a time when so many people were desperate for meaning and belonging, Manson's mix of flower child outward vibes and doomsday inner message struck a chord with people. And this was the era of Vietnam War protests, racial conflict, and political assassinations. So chaos and uncertainty were just filled in the air. And to souls drifting through the Hyatt or Los Angeles, his certainty and charisma were just magnetic. So before long, Charles Manson had gathered around him a very devoted circle of followers, who would come to be known as the Manson family. So the Manson family did not form overnight, and it grew gradually as he roamed California from 1969